Okay, here we are, section 4 of today's lecture. Let's talk a little bit about electronic money, right? So in the previous section, we talked a little bit about commodity money. We talked about fiat money. What is electronic money? Well, first off, electronic money is money that doesn't necessarily have any intrinsic value. It's essentially fiat money. Here, instead of it being tied to pieces of paper, it's tied to electronic IOUs. Those IOUs can be things like debit cards or stored value cards, right? That actually have a physical location, or it can be electronic cash. Like I don't know if any of you have Venmo accounts, right? Which I use quite a bit, right? Um, Essentially online cash, right? Electronic means of payment. So the US here is actually, in many ways, fairly far behind other developed countries and even less developed countries in terms of using electronic cash. In Scandinavia, about 80% of transactions now are taking place electronically. In China, best estimates are 85%, maybe 90% of all electronic transactions now are taking place electronically, right? So, and I'll just confirm this in China. I was in China in December, literally weeks before this whole pandemic thing broke out with a group of students. And one of the challenges we had in December was because we didn't have electronic accounts as visitors, it was actually kind of hard for us to buy things at time because people were not using paper money, right? They much preferred to use electronic money. In China, they have what's called WeChat. WeChat is kind of like, I guess you could think of WeChat as like Facebook and Instagram and Amazon all combined. And WeChat, they have electronic payment systems. And so now I'll show you a picture here. Just as one, here's just a small shop. So this is actually just kind of a street side shop, very informal. But if you look here, shoot, how can I expand this? If you can see here on the left, see that green little sign? That's essentially, what do you call that? Not a UPC code, but yeah, anyway, you basically take a picture of that with your computer and it sends money to this street vendor. And many street vendors, because of security and because of ease, would honestly just prefer you to pay that way, right? And so this was kind of the standard way of paying for things. And so in many ways, less developed countries, countries that didn't have as important financial systems to begin with, have really kind of just jumped right to the forefront of getting involved in electronic money in ways that we have not in the United States. So do you think the US will move to a electronic money society, right? Will we move to a cashless society, right? In which we only use Venmo and Apple Pay, right? And never use paper currency again. One of the things that's really interesting about this pandemic is that I think the pandemic has once again pushed us more towards using electronic money because it doesn't require physical contact, right? So I know many businesses around where I am, they're not accepting money, right? Or they're certainly asking you not to use money. They're asking you to, at the very least, use your credit card, but if you can, to use Venmo or some other electronic payment method so that it can minimize contact. Will we move to a cashless society? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Certainly in the US, it's hard to see that in the immediate future because I think there are some limitations to having electronic money. One of the limitations of electronic money is privacy, right? So if you like to do things that you have to pay for, but you don't want everybody to know about, and I'll leave it to your imagination to imagine what those things might be, you may not want to create an electronic paper trail. And that, of course, is one of the problems with electronic money is it does create a trail in a way that paper money doesn't. There's always the security concerns, right? There's concerns that some people have about the safety of electronic money. Of course, paper money has its own security concerns. I'm not sure that electronic money is necessarily riskier than paper money, but some people do perceive it to be that way. And because a third limitation of electronic money is that you have to have access to technology, right? You have to have access to cell phone service. You have to have access to the internet. You have to have access to a phone, right? And for many poor Americans, that is often a challenge that prohibits them from making the jump to electronic money. And then finally, you need some government support of electronic money, right? Um, one of the things that's happened in China that's really encouraged electronic money is that you can pay for a much wider variety of services electronically, including you can pay your taxes electronically. You can pay for government services. You can pay fines electronically. The US is pretty far behind that, right? I mean, there's still buses in the US where you have to, they won't take electronic money. You have to put the coins in, right? I had to pay the registration for my car the other day, and they wanted to charge me a 10% fee for paying with my credit card. Like, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go write a check in the old fashioned way and send it off to them, right? And so in many ways, the government is going to have to get involved on this, right? Or I can pay my taxes electronically and other fees electronically. That will do a lot towards stimulating or pushing people who might be resistant to electronic money into electronic money. But, I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens here in the future because of the pandemic. Because I've just definitely gotten the feeling that this is going to be a pretty big spur toward the growth of electronic money in the US. What about Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin money? So hopefully all of you are somewhat familiar with Bitcoin, all right? And if not, let me just say a couple of words about what Bitcoin is, though I'm not sure that I know a great deal about Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is essentially a decentralized digital currency, okay? A decentralized digital currency. It's a digital currency that is created by a computer program that allows the currency to grow at a fixed rate, right? Who owns this currency? Well, you basically buy Bitcoin by putting your name in a ledger and essentially claiming a portion of this money supply. One of the interesting things about Bitcoin, though, is who owns the ledger? Well, nobody and everybody, right? It's basically shared across billions of computers, which creates a form of security in that not one single entity can control who has this information on who owns Bitcoin and who doesn't. So the fact that it has a fixed money supply and there's no government that controls it and no government that can regulate it because it's spread throughout the world is very appealing to some people, right? Particularly those people who may not trust, right? So if you don't trust and you don't have belief that paper money is valuable, then maybe you will trust some invisible computer program that supposedly creates some sort of fixed growth in the money supply. However, as a practical matter, I don't think any economists consider Bitcoin to really be money. And the reason why economists don't consider Bitcoin to be money is because, as we've talked about, money has to serve three functions. And right now, Bitcoin doesn't serve any of these three functions very well. First off, money has to be a medium of exchange. It has to be generally accepted. And outside of a few black markets on the internet, Bitcoin is not generally accepted for trade. Second, Bitcoin has to be a unit of account. People have to understand how much it's worth. If you follow Bitcoin, you will know that Bitcoin can go up by 30% one day and down by 40% the next. It's very difficult for Bitcoin to be an effective unit of account when its value is all over the place. And the same for the store of value, right? A third function of money is to be a store of value. But once again, when the value of Bitcoin is fluctuating so much, it just simply can't serve as an effective store of value. And so, I think most economists would say that Bitcoin is not an effective form of money. Could it be in the future? Maybe, right? Maybe. I'm somewhat personally skeptical, but who knows? Who knows what the future holds? What is money then? right? If we're going to try to measure specifically what is money, what counts as money, how are we going to measure it? Well, if we think back to this definition of money being anything that is generally accepted in trade, that's a fairly ambiguous definition, right? I mean, this generally accepted is not exactly a hard and fast rule about what counts as money. And so basically, economists have derived what we count as money, right? Um, but it's somewhat, admittedly, it's somewhat ambiguous here. So economists basically have two measures of money that we widely use, very cleverly called M1 and M2. M1 are things that are clearly money, right? This includes currency, traveler's checks. Most of you don't have any idea what traveler's checks are, but they're essentially kind of IOUs that you had to sign, and you used them when traveling, but as a practical matter, nobody uses these anymore. So we can kind of forget about traveler's checks here. Demand deposits, which basically means checking accounts, and any other checkable deposits. So basically M1 is currency and checkable deposits, right? Those are things that are clearly money. M2 is the second definition of money, which is everything in M1 plus some other things that are close to being in M1. This includes small denomination time deposits, basically savings accounts, right? And savings deposits in money market accounts, which are another form of a short-term saving account. And money market mutual fund shares. Money market mutual fund shares are basically checking accounts that you hold in banks, but the bank puts it in a money market mutual fund, right? We talked about these mutual funds yesterday. So these are things that are very, very liquid, very easy to turn into money. But there are some restrictions on them. They're not quite as liquid as currency and checking accounts. For instance, savings accounts, very liquid, but if you actually look at the details of your savings account, the bank can ask up to 5 days to give you your money back, right? So if you go into the bank and say, give me all the money in my savings account, they will probably say, well, here's all your money because you don't have much in there, right? So if I went in and said, give me all the money in my savings account, they'd be like, here's $5,000. Actually, I wish, and would kick me out. But if I had $100,000, they would say, come back next Monday, right? And so, very liquid. I'm going to get my money and I'm going to get it in a relatively short time period, but I'm not going to get it instantly. And so M2 is very close to M1, but not quite the same. To get some feeling for how big these things are, here's table 1 from your book looking at 2017, and you can see that, focusing here on M1, that about about half of M1 is currency and about half of M1 is checking accounts or demand deposits. And if we look at M2, you see M2 is many, many times bigger than M1, largely because of savings accounts and money market deposit accounts, right? So these savings accounts are a very, very popular way for people to save money. Usually more popular than just traditional checking accounts because they pay interest. Going forward, when I say money, I'm going to be talking about M1, right? So I may not always say M1 when I'm talking about the money supply, but for the most part, unless I make clear otherwise, I'm going to use M1 as our definition of money. So M1, once again, primarily being currency and demand deposits, right? That's what makes up money. You might ask, where are credit cards in this? And so, not to break some bad news to you, but credit cards are a means of delaying payment. They are not a means of making payment, right? So credit cards should not be included as money because they actually are not a way of paying for things. Having said that, there's no doubt that credit cards impact M1 and M2. I mean, one of the fundamental differences today relative to 20 years ago is that most of us hardly carry any currency around, right? We just carry around our checking or our credit card, or we carry around our phone, which is tied to our credit card. So, the nature of M1 has changed. as the way that people pay for things has changed. But we don't see things like M1 show up, or I'm sorry, we don't see things like credit cards show up here in M1. I have a little piece of information here about the case of the missing money. If you actually take this amount of currency and divide it by the population, you'll see that there's about $4,500 of currency per person in the United States. And my guess is that none of you have $4,500 of currency on you. And maybe none of us ever have. Where in the world is all this currency? The Federal Reserve can only account for about 11% of it, right? So a lot of this currency is missing, but we know where it is. It's being held by foreign individuals, or it's being held in black markets, right? And so a big chunk of the money supply, actually the Fed has a very difficult time of monitoring. And that's one of the, we'll talk about this more when we talk about the Fed and how the Fed manages the money supply. But this is one of the complications for the Fed, is that the Fed knows that there's a lot of money out there, but they don't really always have a very good idea about where exactly it is. And a lot of the U.S. money supply is actually not in the U.S. It's floating in offshore accounts in other places where it may not be having much impact on U.S. economic activity. Just really quickly here, if we look at figure 1, we see the growth rates of M1 and M2. You can see that they, in general, tend to follow the same patterns in the long run, but they can often move in very different directions in the short run, right? And so, for instance, if you look in the mid-90s, or in the early 90s and mid-90s, we saw this long period where M1 in the blue fell quite dramatically, while M2 in the red rose. What was happening? Well, that was really the takeoff of the credit card boom, right? Which really caused people to hold a lot less currency, but hold a lot more money in savings accounts. And so, basically the story that this graph tells is that financial innovation greatly changes M1 and M2 in ways that the Federal Reserve often has no control over, right? So as people develop new ways of making payments, new methods of conducting transactions, M1 and M2 often change for reasons that the Fed has no control over. And that's almost certainly true right now, right? As with the pandemic, as people's buying behavior changes, as people maybe move to more digital money, certainly M1 and M2 are changing in ways that the Fed is trying to figure out on the fly, right? So anyway, that really completes chapter 3, right? And that completes the lecture for day 2. So tomorrow we're going to begin talking about bonds and the bond market. And that will really take us, I believe we have 3 days that we'll be talking about bonds and yields and the bond market. And so we'll pick up there tomorrow. Make sure that you attend office hours if you have any questions, or directly email me and we can communicate through email or set up Zoom meetings. So hopefully you're all well. Be safe. See you later.